Good afternoon. This is David Coburn, and I'm at the Paul Masson Vineyards where George Shearing and Mel Torme are performing this weekend. I am extremely happy to have with me right now Mr. Mel Torme. Good afternoon.
David, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good.
A few questions. First of all, I was reading the interview you did with the Christian Science Monitor, and you said you didn't like to be classified as a jazz singer. What kind of a singer are you?
Well, I think that I'm jazz-oriented, David, but I don't like labels. And I think that when one is classified as a pop singer, country singer, rock singer, jazz singer, that it limits, in the minds of an audience, what that singer is all about. For instance, Willie Nelson just did a very nice album of standard tunes like Stardust and I think The Nearness of You, songs like that, even though Willie is known basically as a country singer. I'd like to think that we all have some range, and I'd really just like to be known as a singer who is perhaps jazz-influenced or jazz-oriented. But that actual label, jazz singer, is something that I try to avoid.
Okay. How are the audiences changing in jazz? Do you think younger people such as myself are becoming more interested in it?
Unquestionably. I did a concert not long ago at the Brooklyn Academy of Music in Brooklyn, New York, Buddy Rich and his orchestra and myself. And we perceived, and I think statistically we did it, that the average age of the audience was between 17 and 32, 33.
Wow.
We had a very, a smattering, of course, of older people, but mainly that was our audience. And I find more and more that young people are gravitating toward jazz and other forms of music, not just jazz, in an effort to broaden their horizons musically.
This is being aired on a big band show, which I do up at KFJC. I, for one, I'm only 21, I'm certainly interested in it. Why do you think that the younger audiences are getting more involved in, as opposed to liking rock? Why do you think they're liking jazz more now?
I like rock, and I think that the way rock has developed, frankly, David, from the standpoint of Steely Dan, BS&T, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, so many groups I can think of. I like Chicago, I like Bread, I love Earth, Wind, and Fire. I think it's a wonderful group. But it is a kind of music that is structurally, musically I'm talking about, rather simplistic. It is not complicated. It is not sophisticated music. I think the greatest rock fan in the world isn't going to look anybody in the eye and say, this is the height of sophistication. And I think as young people grow older and evolve and become perhaps a little more complex in their thinking, they seek an alternative musically to what they've been listening to. Now remember, I want to make this clear.
Okay.
Not a substitute. I don't think rock will ever go away. It shouldn't. It's part of our American heritage. And it should be as much a part of our music as classical music, as country, as blues, as jazz, whatever. But I find more and more young people are seeking alternatives, including classical music and certainly including jazz. Because it is more complex. It is more... and I don't say this pompously, believe me, I really don't. Much better and wiser heads than mine have deduced the fact that jazz and classical music are more intellectually stimulating than rock. Rock is very stimulating on an emotional level, the strength of the electronic instruments, the kind of songs that are kind of shouted at you, and they're done with great vigor and great enthusiasm. And that's terrific. Again, I'm telling you point blank, I'm not a patronizer, but I can tell you that I do like many forms of rock and many people who write it and perform it. But the other music is, I suppose, more stimulating on a sophisticated and intellectual level. I know I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make that very clear, that it is not a substitute for rock. I think young people are looking for it, again, as I said, as an alternative.
Mel, with hundreds of requests coming in for you to perform, maybe even thousands, from all over the country, how do you decide where you want to go? And last night you mentioned going to Saratoga, Florida.
That was a joke. Although I did play Sarasota many years ago, as a matter of fact, and did indeed find that Sarasota was a retirement community, which I'd never known about. It was, by the way, that was one of, I must tell you that the joke I pull about Sarasota being, the place where the average age of the audience is deceased, that's purely a joke. Because I got to tell you that audience, they were almost totally older people, were one of the most vibrant, vital, responsive audiences I've ever sung to. I mean, they applauded like the Dickens, and they stood up at the end, and, you know, they were terrific. So I would never put the audience on. It's just a joke. It's kind of a gag. You know?
Yeah. But how do you decide where you want to go?
There are several ingredients to where I want to go. This is a very good example. I wanted to come here to Paul Masson for several reasons. First and foremost, I have to be honest, whenever I get a chance to work with my dear, darling, great, good friend, George Shearing, I jump at it, I leap at it. If the money is even remotely attractive, I go. In the case of Paul Masson, they've been overly generous with me. They've been wonderful. And I admire the wine. I'm a wine drinker. I admire their wine. I admire the setup up here. It's a very beautiful part of California. And
except for the fruit flies. But
well, yeah, you know, we hope that'll be done with soon. And just in general, those elements made me want to come.
Now you've decided where you want to go. This baffles me to this day. You have a repertoire of 5,000 songs. Mel, how do you decide which of the 5,000 songs you're going to sing? Are they the ones that Mr. Shearing knows, or are they ones that you like? How do you decide that?
With Shearing and myself, he knows so many songs. He probably knows more songs than I do.
More than?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I may know more than 5,000. I use that as an example. See, I've been singing virtually all my life. And that is not an idle boast, by the way. I really do think that if I were called to do it on some kind of quiz show or something over a period of about 6 weeks, I think I could come up with at least 5,000, because I've been singing, you know, since I was a baby as a professional performer, since I was 4 years old. So
or in the article, it said 10 months, your mom.
I sang my first song at 10 months old, but I sang professionally for the first time when I was 4, okay? For money when I was 4. And I've never really stopped singing as a professional performer since then. But with George and I, you see, we know so many of the same songs that we have a huge joint repertoire upon which to draw. In other particular instances, what I try to do is to find something reasonably contemporary. In this particular instance, as you know, I'm doing New York State of Mind by Billy Joel, which is in a recent album of mine as well. Or I'll do something by Janice Ian, because I happen to love her. I think she's a wonderful songwriter and a marvelous singer. And musician, by the way. And so what I try to do is choose something in my repertoire that will be fun to sing, that I can sing with some credibility, and that, by and large, will please every kind of segment of an audience. There'll be some jazz, there'll be some standards. Last night I did The Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square, and an old Jerome Kern song called The Folks Who Live on the Hill, and then Shearing and I do that silly little parody on You're the Pits, you're the Tops.
Right.
So that's kind of the humor end of it. And then there's some jazz with Lullaby of Birdland and Pick Yourself Up, and there's the contemporary element of New York State of Mind. So you see already, I've shown you 3 or 4 or 5 genres in which we're able to perform and hopefully please virtually every segment of the audience.
I recently read your interview with The New Yorker, and one point that you made was that it was a good idea to allow some piece of unhappiness from your life to be a part of the show. Now, I noticed this in a Randolph Scott number that you did last night. Why do you feel it's important to be a little unhappy when you please so many millions of people?
Oh, wait a minute. First of all, let's not, you say a Randolph Scott number.
Oh, I see. I wasn't sure.
That's a Jerome Kern song from an old movie that starred Randolph Scott.
Oh.
And I kind of do that as a gag because Randolph Scott was in the film. But the song is The Folks Who Live on the Hill. And that song is a very emotional song for me. It relates to some past happinesses as well as unhappinesses in my life. And just like an actor, I mean, any good actor that I've ever known has always said, you use your experience in your acting, and it makes you more real, it makes you more credible, and hopefully creditable. And that's what I do, David. When I'm singing, I don't use my experience in singing Let's Take a Walk Around the Block or Pick Yourself Up, because those are little rhythm tunes, and you don't really have to invest much in that except some musicality, you know.
Right.
But when you're getting into the heavier ballads, then if you can use your hurt, if you can use your pain and emotion, particularly in emotional songs, I think they're more believable by the public, and that's why I do that.
Well, Mel, can we expect you back at Paul Masson in the near future?
You'll have to ask them about that. If they want me,
You'll come.
I would really love it. I've had a wonderful time here. Jan, the man that runs this place, and Eric, and all the people have made me feel so incredibly welcome that let me put it this way, I'll be very disappointed if I'm not asked back.
I'm sure you
Particularly
will.
based on last night's reaction of the audience.
Well, thank you very much, Mel Torme, for speaking with me. You have a performance this afternoon, so I'll let you go get ready for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.